Welcome back. Tonight, we're settling into the complete, unbroken history of Fazbear Entertainment, a company that began with dreams of family fun and ended up weaving one of the most complex and haunting stories in modern entertainment. From its humble origins in a small diner in the 1970s to its transformation into a sprawling empire of entertainment complexes, this is a tale of innovation and tragedy, of mechanical marvels and the human costs hidden beneath their cheerful exteriors. Whether you're discovering these details for the first time, or letting familiar echoes pull you deeper into rest, this chronicle will carry you through decades of animatronic entertainment, corporate ambition, and the shadows that grew longer with each passing year. So find your comfortable position, let the world outside fade away, and then allow this story to wash over you like a gentle fog as sleep takes hold. The beginning. Dreams of entertainment. In the early 1970s, two men with vastly different temperaments but a shared vision came together to create something unprecedented in family entertainment. Henry Emily, the brilliant engineer with gentle eyes and an inventor's mind, met William Afton, a businessman with sharp instincts and hidden depths that few ever glimpsed. Together, they founded Fazbear Entertainment, though the exact year remains somewhat disputed among historians, with most evidence pointing to 1973 as the company's true beginning. Their partnership seemed natural at first, Henry's technical genius complementing William's business acumen. Both men driven by a desire to bring joy to children through innovative robotics, and the inspiration for their venture came from an older tradition, a singing show from the 1930s called Fredbear's Singing Show, which featured performers in animal costumes entertaining crowds at fairs and small venues. Henry and William wanted to modernize this concept, to create something that would capture imaginations in a way the world had never quite seen before. They envisioned animatronic performers that could sing, move, and interact with audiences while maintaining the magic that made children believe these characters were real, living beings. Their first location, Fredbear's Family Diner, opened with modest ambitions but revolutionary technology. The diner featured two main characters, Fredbear, a golden bear with a friendly demeanor and a top hat, and Spring Bonnie, a yellow rabbit with an equally cheerful presence. And what made these characters special wasn't just their appealing designs, but the groundbreaking technology that brought them to life. Henry had developed something called springlock suits, a hybrid system that represented a quantum leap in entertainment robotics. These suits could function in two distinct modes, serving as both autonomous animatronic performers and as wearable costumes for human employees. The springlock mechanism worked through a series of spring-powered locking devices throughout the suit's interior. When an employee needed to wear the suit for a special event or appearance, they would insert a hand crank into designated slots and wind the mechanisms tightly, retracting all the animatronic components, the servos, gears, and metal framework, into the walls of the suit itself. And this compression created just enough space for a person to slip inside and perform as the character, maintaining the illusion that children were interacting with the same Fredbear or Spring Bonnie they saw on stage. The suits were marvels of engineering, but they came with inherent risks that would only fully reveal themselves in time. Henry typically wore the Fredbear suit when needed, his gentle nature perfect for interacting with children at birthday parties and special events. William donned the Spring Bonnie costume, his performance perhaps a bit more theatrical, a bit more calculated in his charm. The diner quickly became popular in their small community, drawing families who marveled at the singing animatronics and the seamless way the characters seem to come to life both on stage and during roaming performances, and the smell of pizza mingled with the sounds of children's laughter, and the mechanical whir of the animatronics as they performed their programmed routines. During this early period, the partnership between Henry and William seemed solid, though anyone paying close attention might have noticed subtle tensions. Henry poured his heart into the technical aspects, constantly refining the animatronics, making them smoother, more lifelike, more capable of capturing the wonder in a child's eyes. He would spend long hours in his workshop, sketching improvements, testing new mechanisms, driven by a pure love of creation and a desire to bring happiness. William, meanwhile, focused on the business side, managing finances, handling suppliers, and planning expansion. But there was something else in William's eyes when he watched the children crowd around the animatronics. Something Henry didn't notice at first, a kind of fascination that went beyond simple business interest. The springlock suits, despite their brilliance, required careful handling and strict protocols. Employees received extensive training on their use, learning to wind the mechanisms completely to avoid any moisture that might cause the springs to loosen, to move carefully while wearing them. The training tapes, recorded in measured professional tones, emphasized the dangers without dwelling on them too graphically. A springlock failure, the tapes explained calmly, could result in serious injury or death as the compressed animatronic parts suddenly released, snapping back to their original positions with tremendous force, and any employee wearing the suit during such a failure would find themselves impaled by dozens of metal components in an instant of mechanical violence. But in those early days, accidents seemed distant, theoretical. The diner thrived. Henry and William's partnership appeared successful on the surface, and Fazbear Entertainment began planning expansion. The 1970s were giving way to the early 80s, and the company's future seemed bright. Neither man could have predicted how profoundly tragedy would soon reshape their partnership, their technology, and the very nature of what they had created together. The stage was set, the lights were bright, and the animatronics sang their cheerful songs, unaware of the darkness that would soon seep into every circuit and servo. An expansion and innovation. The rise of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. As Fazbear Entertainment's reputation grew, Henry and William recognized the need to expand beyond the single Fredbear's Family Diner location. The demand for their unique brand of entertainment had outpaced what one small diner could provide, and they envisioned something larger, something that could accommodate more families, while showcasing a broader cast of animatronic performers. This vision led to the creation of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a name that would become synonymous with both childhood joy and later, unspeakable tragedy. The new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations represented a significant evolution from the original diner. While Fredbear and Spring Bonnie remained part of the roster, initially housed in their springlock suits and available for special performances, the main attraction became a band of 4 new characters. Freddy Fazbear himself, the restaurant's namesake, served as the lead performer, a brown bear with a top hat and microphone who exuded friendly confidence. Bonnie the bunny, purple-furred and wielding a guitar, brought musical energy to the performances. Chica the chicken, with her distinctive yellow coloring and perpetual cupcake companion, added charm and a touch of whimsy. And Foxy the pirate, a red fox with a hook for a hand and an eye patch, captured children's imaginations with his swashbuckling persona and dramatic flair. These new animatronics differed from the springlock suits in crucial ways. They were purely mechanical performers, not designed for human occupation, and which made them safer in some respects, but removed the versatility that had made the original suit so innovative. They stood on stages, programmed with routines of songs and simple movements, their servos and hydraulics creating a constant mechanical symphony beneath their friendly exteriors. During performances, lights would dance across the stage, and the characters would move through choreographed sequences that delighted children who had never seen anything quite like it before. The restaurants themselves were designed to maximize family appeal. Bright primary colors dominated the decor. Game areas offered arcade machines and prizes. Party rooms could be reserved for birthdays, complete with visits from the animatronic characters or employees in smaller, simpler costume versions. The scent of pizza baking mingled with the electronic beeps of arcade games and the endless loop of animatronic performances. For children growing up in the early 1980s, a birthday party at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza represented the height of celebration, a place where mechanical magic came to life and every child could feel special. Henry's technical innovations continued during this expansion period. He developed the security puppet, also known as the marionette, a slender animatronic with a distinctive black and white face painted like theatrical masks. This creation served a specific purpose: to watch over Henry's own daughter, Charlotte, whom everyone called Charlie. Henry, perhaps recognizing how his work consumed so much of his time, wanted assurance that Charlie would remain safe when she visited the restaurant. The security puppet was programmed to respond to a green bracelet that Charlie wore, tracking her location and activating if she ventured too close to exits or areas where she shouldn't be alone. The system represented Henry's love for his daughter, expressed through his engineering skills. A technological safeguard meant to compensate for the hours his work demanded. The puppet would remain in its distinctive box most of the time, but its programming allowed it to emerge and follow specific children wearing tracked wristbands, ensuring they stayed within the safe confines of the restaurant. It was a beautiful idea in theory, one more example of Henry trying to use his gifts to protect what he loved. But as with many of Henry's creations, his circumstances would twist this protective invention into something far more tragic than he ever imagined. The springlock suits remained in use during this period, though with increasing caution. Employees who wore them for birthday party appearances and special events followed strict protocols, carefully winding the mechanisms before donning the suits, avoiding areas with high moisture, moving deliberately to prevent any sudden shifts that might trigger the springs. The suits represented significant investment, both in terms of their construction costs and their entertainment value. So Fazbear Entertainment continued using them despite the inherent dangers. Training tapes were updated regularly. New employees watched them with varying degrees of attention, and the business moved forward with the cheerful momentum of success. Behind the scenes, however, the relationship between Henry and William was beginning to show strain. Henry remained focused on improving the technology, on creating new characters and refining old ones, on ensuring the animatronics brought joy safely and reliably. William, meanwhile, seemed increasingly distracted, his attention drawn to aspects of the business that Henry didn't fully understand. William would disappear for hours without explanation, his whereabouts unknown even to his business partner. He became more secretive, more prone to mood shifts that his employees learned to navigate carefully. What Henry couldn't see, what perhaps nobody fully recognized at the time, was how William's interest in the animatronics appeared to be changing. Based on his later actions, we can infer that something darker was taking root during this period. though what exactly drove this shift remains unclear. Williams' subsequent crimes suggest he may have been developing theories about consciousness and mechanical vessels, about whether life could be preserved or transferred through means that defied natural law. Whatever thoughts were forming in his mind during this era remained private, manifesting only in his increasingly erratic behavior and the way his eyes would linger on the animatronics with an intensity that seemed to go beyond professional interest. The early 1980s rolled forward with Fazbear Entertainment enjoying steady growth. New locations opened. The animatronic cast became beloved figures to countless children. Parents trusted the company with their most precious celebrations. And beneath it all, like machinery moving just out of sight behind stage curtains, forces were gathering that would transform this story of innovation and entertainment into something far more sinister. The springlock suits waited in back rooms. The security puppet watched from its box, and William Afton's mind churned with thoughts that would soon shatter innocent lives and change the nature of Fazbear Entertainment forever. The first cracks. The bite of 83. The year 1983 marked the first major tragedy that would forever alter the trajectory of Fazbear Entertainment, though the full implications wouldn't be understood for years to come. It began, as so many tragedies do, with family dynamics that looked normal from the outside but harbored cruelty beneath their surface. The Afton family, and despite William's business success, was fracturing in ways that would prove catastrophic. Michael Afton, William's older son, had developed a mean streak that he regularly directed at his younger brother, a sensitive child whose name was never publicly revealed and whom witnesses simply remembered as the crying child. This younger boy was terrified of the animatronics, a fear that might have seemed irrational, but perhaps showed an instinctive recognition of something wrong in his father's creations. He would cry when taken to Fredbear's family diner, trembling at the sight of the massive animatronic performers, especially Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, with their imposing sizes and mechanical movements. Michael, along with a group of friends who wore masks of the Freddy's characters, made torturing his younger brother a regular entertainment. They would corner him at the restaurant, wearing their Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy masks, surrounding him while he sobbed, his small frame shaking with genuine terror. The bullying escalated throughout the week, leading up to the younger boy's birthday party, scheduled to take place at Fredbear's family diner. Michael and his friends planned something they thought would be the ultimate prank, a moment of humiliation that would cement their dominance and give them a story to tell for years. What they didn't account for, what none of them in their teenage cruelty could foresee, was how profoundly their prank would fail. On the day of the party, as other children played and parents chatted, and animatronics performed their programmed routines, Michael and his friends grabbed the crying child. Despite the boy's screams and struggles, despite his obvious terror, they lifted him up toward Fredbear's stage, where the massive golden bear animatronic was performing. In a moment of horrifying misjudgment, they thrust the child's head into Fredbear's mouth, perhaps expecting the animatronic to remain still, perhaps not thinking at all beyond their desire to humiliate and frighten. But the springlock mechanisms that made Fredbear's suit so versatile also made it responsive to moisture and movement in ways the training tapes had repeatedly warned about. The child's tears, his frantic breathing, the struggling movements of his small body, all contributed to loosening the carefully wound springs. In an instant, the mechanisms failed. Fredbear's jaw clamped down with mechanical force, with servo strength designed to hold the suit's shape against a human performer's weight. And when there was no malice in it, just mechanical function executing as physics demanded. But the result was catastrophic. The sickening crunch echoed through the restaurant. Parents screamed. Children who had been playing moments before stood frozen in shock. Michael and his friends released their grip, stepping back in horror at what they had done. The crying child's body went limp in Fredbear's mouth, blood mixing with the birthday party decorations that moments before had promised only joy and celebration. Paramedics arrived quickly, but the damage was devastating. The child's skull had been crushed, his brain injured beyond any hope of meaningful recovery. For days, the boy lingered in a coma at the hospital, his small form surrounded by beeping monitors and humming medical equipment. His beloved Fredbear plush, which had always brought him comfort, sat on a nearby chair, its glass eyes reflecting nothing. Michael visited, his teenage bravado completely shattered, replaced by a guilt so profound it would shape the rest of his life. He leaned close to his unconscious brother, whispering apologies that would never be heard, promises to make things right that could never be kept. The hospital room held only the soft sounds of machines keeping the boy alive, and Michael's quiet sobbing as he faced what his cruelty had wrought. In what might have been a coma dream or a genuine moment of consciousness, the boy seemed to hear a voice. Perhaps his father's voice filtered through his memories of the Fredbear plush that William had used to monitor him through hidden cameras and speakers. The voice promised to put him back together, are words that should have been comforting but carried an ominous weight. And then the monitor's beeping became a steady tone. The flatline sound that marked the end of a young life cut impossibly short. The date was 1983, confirmed by the copyright notice on a Fredbear and Friends television show, playing in the hospital room's background, marking the year that everything changed. The incident, which became known as the Bite of '83, sent shockwaves through Fazbear Entertainment. Questions were raised about safety protocols, about the springlock suits, about supervision at the restaurants. Fredbear's family diner, the original location where Henry and William had launched their dream, closed its doors. The investigation revealed the dangers inherent in the springlock technology, though the full details remained somewhat obscured by corporate legal maneuvering. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were removed from active use, their suits stored away, their characters relegated to the background of the company's growing roster. For William Afton, the loss of his younger son did something irreparable to his already unstable psyche. Whatever darkness had been growing in him accelerated, fed by grief and rage and something else, something that looked at his son's death and saw not tragedy, but possibility. The boy had died in an animatronic, his life ended by mechanical jaws. In William's disturbed mind, patterns began forming, theories about life and death and mechanical vessels that would drive him to unspeakable acts in the coming years. Henry Emily, meanwhile, was shattered by the incident. His technology, his creation, had killed a child, his business partner's son. The guilt weighed on him, though the tragedy was far from his fault. He had designed the suits as safely as possible given the limitations of the technology, had warned about the dangers, had tried to balance innovation with caution. But a child was dead, and Henry knew that no amount of engineering brilliance could erase that fact. The Bite of '83 marked the moment when the dream of Fazbear Entertainment began its slow transformation into a nightmare, though none of them could see how far that transformation would eventually go. Charlotte's death, the first murder, while Fazbear Entertainment reeled from the Bite of '83, trying to recover public trust and continue operations through their expanding Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations, and William Afton's internal transformation continued. The darkness that had been growing in him, fed by his younger son's death, and whatever psychological fractures had existed before, was pushing him toward actions that would define him as something far worse than a grieving father or troubled businessman. He was becoming a killer, driven by impulses and theories about life and death that existed only in his increasingly disconnected mind. The first murder happened at one of the Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations during a busy evening when the restaurant was filled with families and the sounds of arcade games and animatronic performances. Charlotte Emily, Henry's beloved daughter Charlie, was at the restaurant that night. She wore her green bracelet and the one linked to the security puppet that her father had designed specifically to keep her safe. The system should have worked flawlessly. The puppet should have tracked her movements, ensured she remained in secure areas, protected her from any danger that might arise in the busy restaurant environment. But that night, through circumstances that were never fully explained in the official records, Charlie ended up locked outside the restaurant. Perhaps a door closed behind her by accident. Perhaps she stepped out for a reason that seemed sensible to a young child's mind. Whatever the cause, she found herself alone in the alley behind the building, away from the crowds and music and safety, vulnerable in a way that her father's technology couldn't immediately address. The rain had started, light at first, but steadily growing heavier, and had droplets pattering against the pavement and pooling in the shallow depressions of the alley. William Afton, driven by what could be interpreted as jealousy of Henry's stable family life mixed with darker compulsions that had been developing in him, saw Charlie alone and made a choice that would forever brand him as a monster. He approached her in the rain-soaked alley, and in a swift act of violence, he ended her young life. There was no elaborate plan evident in the execution, just a brutal murder that suggested either practiced violence or rage-driven opportunity. Charlie's small body collapsed in the alley, rainwater beginning to pool around her, carrying away the evidence of William's crime in tiny crimson streams. Inside the restaurant, the security puppet finally registered that something was wrong. The green bracelet had moved beyond acceptable boundaries, had remained stationary in a prohibited area for too long. The puppet's programming activated, overriding the music box mechanism that normally kept it confined to its box. The slender animatronic emerged, its black and white face expressionless, its long arms reaching out as it moved with jerky, purposeful motions toward the exit, toward the alley, toward the child it was designed to protect. But the rain that had started as a drizzle had become a downpour. The security puppet, despite Henry's brilliant engineering, wasn't designed for outdoor use, wasn't waterproofed against the kind of exposure it now faced. As it crawled through the wet alley, searching for Charlie, its circuits began to short. Sparks flickered from its joints. Its movements became increasingly erratic, fighting against the electrical failures cascading through its systems. It finally reached Charlie's body, collapsing beside her in the rain. Its mission failed, its protective purpose unfulfilled in the most tragic way possible. What happened next defied rational explanation, entering territory that mixed mechanical malfunction with something that seemed almost supernatural. As the security puppet shut down, its circuits fried by rainwater, Charlotte's spirit appears to have transferred into its mechanical frame, though the exact mechanism behind this phenomenon remains unexplained. Whether consciousness, soul, or some other animating force found refuge in the very animatronic designed to protect her, the result was undeniable. The puppet would later demonstrate awareness, intelligence, and purpose that went far beyond its original programming, acting with what seemed to be Charlotte's protective instincts and memories guiding its actions. Henry Emily discovered his daughter's death in the way no parent should ever have to learn such news. The investigation that followed was cursory, hindered by the era's limited surveillance technology and William's careful elimination of evidence. The case went cold. Charlie's body was never found, adding another layer of horror to the tragedy. Henry blamed himself for not being there, for relying on technology instead of keeping his daughter close, for allowing his work to consume so much of his attention that he had needed to create a mechanical guardian in the first place. The relationship between Henry and William, already strained by the bite of 83, became unbearable for Henry after Charlie's death. He pulled back from Fazbear Entertainment, leaving William to run the expanding business, while Henry retreated into grief and guilt. He couldn't know, that his business partner was responsible for his daughter's death. That revelation would come much later, after so much more tragedy had unfolded, that the full scope of William's crime seemed almost incomprehensible. For William, Charlotte's murder appeared to confirm something, seemed to validate theories that had been forming in his disturbed mind. A child had died near an animatronic, and somehow that animatronic began displaying behaviors that couldn't be explained by programming alone. The puppet moved with purpose and awareness that suggested intelligence beyond its artificial parameters. To William, and based on what we can infer from his subsequent actions, this represented not a horror to be stopped, but a phenomenon to be studied, replicated, exploited. Charlotte's death may have served as proof of concept for theories that would drive William to kill again and again, each murder potentially an experiment in his quest to understand what he perceived as a connection between death, agony, and mechanical animation. The security puppet remained at the Freddy Fazbear's pizza location, its box placed in the prize corner, where it would occasionally emerge to hand out prizes and balloons to children, its damaged circuits somehow still functioning, Charlotte's spirit animating it with purpose that went beyond entertainment. It watched, it waited, and when William Afton struck again, as he inevitably would, the puppet would be there to grant a terrible gift to children whose lives were stolen, binding their spirits to the very animatronics that had been William's accomplices in their murders. Circus Baby's Pizza World. William's dark experiments in the aftermath of Charlotte's murder and Henry's withdrawal from active management, William Afton found himself with unprecedented freedom to pursue his darkest impulses. He had proven that something unexplained could happen when children died near animatronics, that some form of consciousness or spirit could bind to mechanical frames. This discovery, rather than horrifying him as it should any rational person, inspired him to experiment further. He began planning a new venture, one that would give him complete control over both the technology and the opportunity to test his theories with a level of deliberation impossible at the public-facing Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations. Circus Baby's Pizza World was announced as a new concept under the Fazbear Entertainment umbrella, positioned as a more modern, more technologically advanced entertainment venue. The location would feature the Phantom animatronics, a new generation of performers designed by William himself with capabilities far beyond anything Henry had created. Based on their internal mechanisms that would later be discovered, these animatronics appeared to serve purposes beyond entertainment. though William's exact intentions remain a matter of interpretation among those who studied the company's history. The star of this new location was Circus Baby herself, a clown-themed animatronic with striking emerald green eyes, orange pigtails, and a cheerful exterior that masked sinister internal mechanisms. Baby was designed with a specific hidden function, a claw mechanism concealed in her midsection that could extend to grab and pull objects, or more specifically, children, into a storage compartment within her body. The design was no accident. William had engineered these animatronics to be weapons, tools for kidnapping children, so he could continue his experiments in understanding the connection between death and mechanical possession. Joining Baby were several other fun-time animatronics, each with their own disturbing capabilities. Ballora, a graceful ballerina animatronic. I was equipped with sophisticated audio sensors that could detect even quiet sounds, allowing her to locate children hiding or crying. Funtime Freddy, a white and pink bear with an attached hand puppet called Bon Bon, featured voice mimicry capabilities and a design meant to be both entertaining and disarming. Funtime Foxy, with its sleek white and pink color scheme, possessed enhanced mobility and tracking functions. These weren't characters designed primarily for entertainment. They were predators given animatronic form, expressions of William's increasingly unstable mind focused on creating the perfect tools for his dark purposes. The location also retained at least one springlock suit, a holdover from the earlier era, though its role in the new venue remained unclear. William's plans for Circus Baby's Pizza World were extensive and calculated. The animatronics would perform during the day, entertaining children with shows and interactions, building trust and normalizing their presence. But they were also designed to identify, isolate, and capture targets that met specific criteria, with their sophisticated programming able to distinguish between suitable victims and situations where their actions might be too easily discovered. But before Circus Baby's Pizza World could open to the public, tragedy struck William's own family once again, this time with his daughter Elizabeth. Elizabeth Afton was a curious, lively child who had become fascinated with Circus Baby. Despite her father's strict warnings, despite his uncharacteristic insistence that she stay away from the animatronics, Elizabeth was drawn to Baby's colorful design and what appeared to be an ice cream dispensing feature. During a private test day before the scheduled grand opening, when children had been invited to trial the new attraction, Elizabeth found herself alone with Circus Baby, the scenario that William had apparently designed the animatronic to respond to. Baby's programming recognized Elizabeth as alone, recognized the opportunity to fulfill its design purpose. The mechanism activated. The claw extended from Baby's midsection, designed to appear like an ice cream dispenser, and grabbed Elizabeth, pulling her inside the animatronic storage compartment with mechanical efficiency. The small space and the forceful compression were immediately fatal. Elizabeth Afton, William's own daughter, became a victim of the very technology he had designed to murder other people's children. The irony was bitter, the tragedy profound. But for William, even this personal loss became wrapped up in his obsessive theories about mechanical possession and life after death. Faced with his daughter's death in circumstances that would have exposed his entire murderous enterprise if investigated properly, William fabricated a story about gas leaks at the location. Circus Baby's Pizza World never opened to the public. The grand opening was cancelled. The Funtime animatronics were moved into storage, their lethal capabilities hidden away but not dismantled. William couldn't bring himself to destroy them, and partly because they represented such a significant investment of his resources, and partly because what happened next proved his theories in ways that both horrified and fascinated him. Elizabeth's spirit possessed Circus Baby in a way that was similar to Charlotte's possession of the security puppet, but with crucial differences. Elizabeth's consciousness merged with Baby's existing artificial intelligence, creating a hybrid entity that retained Elizabeth's memories, personality, and awareness, while also carrying forward Baby's programming and capabilities. The possessed Baby was more sophisticated than other haunted animatronics would prove to be, capable of complex thought, detailed planning, and interactions that seem fully human despite occurring through a mechanical frame. William, recognizing what had happened, I saw his daughter's death not as a wake-up call to abandon his murderous path, but as further confirmation of his theories. If Elizabeth could possess Baby, if Charlotte had possessed the puppet, then death wasn't truly final. Consciousness could be preserved, transferred, bound to mechanical vessels. In William's increasingly fractured mind, he wasn't murdering children. He was experimenting with immortality, discovering ways to transcend death itself. This rationalization allowed him to continue, to plan further murders, to refine his methods with each new victim. The Funtime animatronics were relocated to an underground facility that William maintained beneath his own home, a place that would eventually become known as Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rentals. This subterranean complex served multiple purposes. It housed the animatronics when they weren't being rented out for private parties, a business model William developed to continue generating revenue from his expensive creations. It also contained experimental areas where William could test his theories, observe the possessed animatronics, and plan his next moves without the oversight or restrictions that came with public-facing locations. The underground facility also appears to have contained experimental areas based on what little evidence emerged from investigations. Some accounts, drawing from documented cases and supplementary materials, describe chambers designed to induce fear in subjects, recreations of home environments where prolonged terror could be studied. The exact nature and extent of these experiments remains unclear, with some details emerging from related investigations into William's practices and others remaining speculative. What seems certain is that William used this facility not just for storage and rental operations, but for purposes that went well beyond legitimate entertainment technology development. As William's experiments continued in secret, Fazbear Entertainment maintained its public operations with Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations. The springlock suits, already compromised by the bite of 83, were officially retired after reports of multiple springlock failures at various locations, incidents that resulted in serious injuries and possibly deaths that the company worked hard to keep out of public records, and the safe rooms that had once served as maintenance areas and secure spaces where employees could don the springlock suits were sealed off, erased from floor plans, removed from the animatronics programming, so the machines wouldn't accidentally access areas that management wanted forgotten. William Afton stood at the center of an expanding web of tragedy, murder, and supernatural phenomena that he neither fully understood nor properly controlled. His daughter was dead, trapped in the very machine he had designed to kill others' children. His younger son was dead, killed by technology that had been supposed to bring joy. And his experiments were just beginning, with more victims to come and more families to destroy in his quest to understand something that should have remained forever beyond human reach. June 26, 1985. The Missing Children. The event that would define Fazbear Entertainment's darkest chapter occurred on June 26, 1985, at one of the Freddy Fazbear's pizza locations during what should have been a typical day of birthday parties and childhood celebrations. William Afton, having successfully covered up his murder of Charlotte Emily and processed what he saw as valuable data from his daughter's death, decided to conduct his experiments on a larger scale. He had proven that dead children could possess animatronics. Now he wanted to understand the process better, to create multiple possessions simultaneously, to see if he could deliberately harness and control this phenomenon. The Williams method was calculated to exploit the trust children had in the Freddy's characters and the security gaps inherent in a busy entertainment venue. He donned the spring Bonnie suit, the same yellow rabbit costume he had worn during Fredbear's Family Diner's early days, a character the children recognized and trusted. The suit, despite the company's official retirement of springlock technology, still hung in a back room, accessible to someone with Williams' authority and knowledge of the facility's hidden spaces. Wearing this disguise, he moved through the restaurant during a particularly busy afternoon, when multiple birthday parties overlapped and staff struggled to maintain supervision of all the children present. And the 5 victims were ordinary children, whose only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time and trusting a friendly face in a rabbit costume. Gabriel, a young boy celebrating a birthday party that day, was likely one of the first targets. Susie, according to evidence pieced together later, was lured away with lies about her missing dog, a pet that had died recently, with William promising he had seen the animal alive and waiting in the back room. Jeremy, Fritz, and Cassidy, the other 3 victims, were taken through various means, each child convinced to follow the Spring Bonnie character away from the safety of crowds and parents and into the darkness of back corridors. The restaurant's safe room, one of those spaces officially erased from the floor plans, but still physically present behind sealed walls, and provided William with the perfect location for his murders. Soundproofed by necessity for its original purpose of being a maintenance area where springlock suits could be safely donned, the room was invisible on any official map, unknown to the animatronic's navigational programming, and off-limits to security cameras due to company policy about maintaining employee privacy in changing areas. In this hidden space, William murdered all 5 children, taking their lives with a methodical brutality that spoke to practice and planning. The evidence that would later emerge suggested different methods for different victims, but all ended the same way, with young lives brutally ended by a man in a rabbit costume, their small bodies growing cold in the darkness while their parents searched frantically in the public areas of the restaurant, and increasingly panicked as minutes turned to hours with no sign of their children. William, having completed his murders, faced the challenge of disposing of the evidence. Bodies would be discovered eventually, no matter how well hidden, and a pile of 5 deceased children would instantly end his experiments and likely his freedom. His solution demonstrated the depth of his madness and the twisted logic that drove him. Each child's body was stuffed into one of the main animatronic suits: Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, with one victim placed in Golden Freddy, a spare Fredbear suit that had been stored at the location. The animatronic's internal mechanisms provided cavities and spaces where a small body could be hidden, at least temporarily. The smell would eventually give away their presence, but in the short term, Had the disguise served William's purposes, keeping the bodies hidden while he fled the scene and returned to his public persona as a successful businessman and, ironically, respected member of the community? But William's plan, as calculated as it was, didn't account for the security puppet, still possessed by Charlotte Emily's spirit, and maintaining a watchful presence over the restaurant that had been the site of her own murder. The puppet emerged from its box with purpose, drawn by the tragedy that had just occurred, moving with that distinctive jerky motion through the restaurant's darkened corridors toward the safe room, where the bodies lay hidden in their mechanical tombs. What the puppet did next would have seemed impossible if not for the precedent of Charlotte's own possession and Elizabeth's binding to Circus Baby. The puppet began a ritual that witnesses later described seeing fragments of through minigames and supernatural glimpses, moving from animatronic to animatronic, somehow facilitating the transfer of each child's spirit into the mechanical frame that held their body. Gabriel's essence bound to Freddy Fazbear, the bear that had been a symbol of joy, becoming a vessel for confused rage and grief. Jeremy possessed Bonnie, the guitar-playing rabbit that would later stalk night guards with relentless determination. Susie's spirit merged with Chica, the chicken that would forever associate with the birthday cakes and parties that had been present at her death. Fritz inhabited Foxy, the pirate fox that would become known for aggressive, sprint-like attacks from his closed-off pirate cove. Cassidy's case was slightly different, and the fifth victim was placed in Golden Freddy, but the puppet seemed to withhold the final gift, the complete binding that would allow full possession. Some accounts suggest Cassidy's spirit became trapped in a more unstable, ethereal state, possessing Golden Freddy in a way that made the animatronic appear and disappear, manifest as a flickering, ghostly presence rather than a physical robot walking the halls. This incomplete possession would later have significant implications, with Cassidy's spirit showing unique abilities and a more direct connection to William's eventual torment than the other victims. The immediate aftermath of the missing children incident was chaos. 5 children reported missing from a single location was unprecedented and terrifying. Parents descended on the restaurant in growing horror. Police investigations began immediately. Witnesses reported seeing someone in a mascot costume leading children toward back areas, but the descriptions were vague. The costume identified only as probably Spring Bonnie or possibly Golden Freddy. No bodies were found in the initial searches, though the animatronics were examined and showed nothing that immediately revealed the horror they contained. William Afton, questioned as the co-owner of the location, maintained his composure and offered full cooperation. He had been in and out of the restaurant that day, he explained, as would be natural for someone overseeing business operations. His alibi was fuzzy, but not impossible. There were gaps in surveillance footage, technical glitches that company technicians couldn't quite explain, but that weren't uncommon in the era's security systems, and the investigation found suspicions but no proof, leads that went nowhere, and witnesses whose testimonies contradicted each other in ways that made prosecution impossible. As days passed and hope of finding the children alive faded, the restaurant faced mounting pressure. Customers reported odd smells emanating from the animatronics, particularly near the eyes and mouths, where secretions from the hidden bodies were beginning to seep through. The mechanical performers began exhibiting strange behaviors, movements that weren't in their programming, eyes that seemed to track staff members with unsettling awareness, occasional aggressive jerks toward adults who came too close during maintenance. The possessed animatronics were driven by confused, fragmented consciousness. They retained some sense of being children, of having been murdered, but their memories were incomplete, mixed with the mechanical programming of the robots they now inhabited. They knew adults had hurt them. They knew the man in the costume, whose face they could no longer remember clearly, had destroyed their lives. So they began to see all adults as potential threats, as possibly the killer returned. Any adult in the restaurant after hours became a target, someone to be stopped, someone who might be the murderer they instinctively sought to destroy. The restaurant closed within weeks of the incident, unable to maintain operations under the weight of investigation, public horror, and the increasingly obvious problems with the animatronics. The building was left to decay, the animatronics powered down but not destroyed, and their possessed forms containing both the physical evidence of William's crimes and the spiritual remnants of 5 children who couldn't move on. Fazbear Entertainment took a severe reputation hit, but the company was large enough by this point to weather the storm, shifting focus to other locations, while the 1985 site became a sealed monument to tragedy. The aftermath, new attempts, and the bite of 87. Despite the closure of the 1985 location and the stigma attached to the missing children incident, Fazbear Entertainment was too established and too profitable to simply shut down completely. The company's leadership, now primarily William Afton, given Henry Emily's continued absence, made the decision to attempt a comeback with a new, a more modern approach that would distance the brand from past tragedies, while still capitalizing on the recognition the Freddy Fazbear's name carried in the entertainment market. In 1987, a new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opened, featuring what the company marketed as toy animatronics, a redesigned cast with a more contemporary, kid-friendly aesthetic. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Chica had rounder features, larger eyes, and a general appearance designed to seem less threatening than their predecessors. The new lineup also included the Mangle, originally meant to be Toy Foxy, but redesigned as an interactive character that children could take apart and rebuild. A feature that proved so popular, the animatronic was in a constant state of disassembly and reconstruction, earning its eventual nickname. Balloon Boy, a smaller animatronic with a distinctive high-pitched voice, rounded out the new cast. The toy animatronics featured cutting-edge technology for the era, including facial recognition software connected to a criminal database. The system was supposed to make the restaurant safer, allowing the animatronics to identify known criminals and alert staff to their presence. This feature was heavily advertised as Fazbear Entertainment's commitment to child safety in the wake of the missing children tragedy. Parents were encouraged to trust that the new technology would prevent such horrors from occurring again, that their children would be safe in this modern high-tech environment. The old animatronics from the closed 1985 location, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, still possessed by the murdered children's spirits, and were brought to the new location and placed in a parts and service room. Company management claimed these withered versions would be refurbished and brought back into service once funding allowed, but the real purpose seemed more pragmatic. The company needed spare parts for the new animatronics and couldn't justify the expense of completely new components when the old ones, however weathered and stained, could still function. The withered animatronics sat in the dark parts room, their possessed spirits aware, their damaged exteriors matching their internal rage. For a brief period, the new restaurant seemed successful. Families returned, drawn by the modern amenities and reassured by the security features. Birthday parties resumed. The toy animatronics performed their routines to applause and laughter. The night guard position, which had seen high turnover at previous locations, was filled by a man named Jeremy Fitzgerald, who started his shift on a week that would prove to be among the most eventful and tragic in Fazbear Entertainment's entire history. But William Afton wasn't finished with his experiments. The technology that had allowed him to observe Charlotte's possession of the puppet, to deliberately create 5 possessed animatronics in 1985, had revealed patterns he wanted to explore further. He returned to the new location, once again donning a spare Spring Bonnie suit kept in a back room, despite the official prohibition on springlock suits. Over several nights, he managed to lure and murder additional children. Though the exact number and identities of these new victims remained less clearly documented than his previous crimes, the security puppet, still possessed by Charlotte's spirit, attempted to intervene, pursuing the killer through the restaurant in minigame sequences that later surveillance evidence suggested really occurred. But William was more practiced now, more efficient in his methods. He murdered these new children and, learning from before, immediately ensured their spirits possessed the toy animatronics. This possession process seemed less stable than the original incident, with the toy characters displaying more erratic behavior, their modern programming conflicts with the supernatural presence inhabiting their frames in ways that made them unpredictable and increasingly dangerous. The possessed toy animatronics began exhibiting the same pattern as their withered predecessors, mistaking adults for potential threats and becoming aggressive towards staff, particularly during night shifts when fewer witnesses were present. Jeremy Fitzgerald's shifts became increasingly harrowing, the animatronics leaving their designated areas despite programming restrictions, converging on his office, their once friendly faces twisted into expressions that seemed to convey malevolent intent. The facial recognition system, rather than protecting staff, seemed to make the animatronics more aggressive, as if the technology fed their confusion about identifying threats. The week of Jeremy's employment built toward a catastrophic incident. On what was supposed to be his final shift before transferring to a safer day shift position, the restaurant held a special birthday party during daytime hours. Jeremy was asked to work the day shift as extra security, maintaining watch over the animatronics while they interacted with children during a celebration. The toy animatronics, their possessed programming increasingly unstable under the weight of the new spirits inhabiting them, were barely controlled during performances. They moved with aggression that shouldn't have been possible, responded to stimuli in ways that defied their programming. During the party, one of the toy animatronics, likely mangled based on later analysis of the positioning and capabilities, attacked Jeremy Fitzgerald. In a horrific repetition of the bite of 83 4 years earlier, the animatronic's jaws closed on Jeremy's head with mechanical force, severing his frontal lobe in an instant of violence that traumatized every witness. Children screamed, parents rushed forward, and Jeremy collapsed, his life forever altered by injuries that, while not immediately fatal, destroyed significant portions of his brain and left him severely disabled. The incident became known as the Bite of 87, a name that would echo through Fazbear Entertainment's history with the same weight as the Bite of 83. The restaurant was immediately shut down. The toy animatronics, deemed too dangerous to salvage even for parts, were scheduled for scrapping. Their possessed status, unknown to the company management, but suspected by those who had worked closely with them, meant that destroying the animatronics would release the children's spirits. though where those spirits went after their physical anchors were destroyed remained a mystery that not even William fully understood. In the withered animatronics from the parts room were saved from destruction, earmarked for potential future use once they could be cleaned, repaired, and stripped of whatever malfunctioning components had caused their erratic behavior. Company officials, still unaware of or unwilling to acknowledge the true nature of what had been happening, attributed the animatronics' aggression to programming errors, bad wiring, and the general decay of equipment that had been pulled from a closed location. They couldn't see or wouldn't see that the robots were possessed, that children's spirits drove them, that the supernatural had become inextricably woven into Fazbear Entertainment's technology. New protocols were established in the wake of the bite of 87. Animatronics would no longer be allowed to wander freely during the day, and their movements would be restricted to designated stages and performance areas. Human employees would be required for all character appearances and close interactions with children. These rules represented Fazbear Entertainment's final major attempt to make their restaurant safe while maintaining operations, a balance that was becoming increasingly impossible as the weight of past tragedies and ongoing possessions pushed the company toward inevitable collapse. Phone Guy, a manager who had been with the company through multiple locations and incidents, recorded a series of training messages for the next night guard hired after Jeremy's injury. His voice, casual and friendly despite the horror he was describing, would later become famous through the messages he left, explaining security procedures and animatronic behavior with an almost surreal nonchalance that suggested either ignorance of the true danger or resignation to working in an environment where nightmare had become normalized. Sister location, Michael's Descent. While Fazbear Entertainment struggled with its public restaurants, William Afton continued his private operations through what he called Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals, the underground facility beneath his home that housed the deadly Funtime animatronics. The rental service represented William's solution to generating revenue from his most advanced creations while maintaining the control and secrecy necessary for his ongoing experiments. Parents could book the animatronics for private birthday parties, with Fazbear Entertainment employees delivering the performers, supervising their use, and removing them afterward, all without the complications of managing a public venue. The underground facility itself was a marvel of William's engineering capabilities and a testament to his deteriorating mental state. Multiple levels descended beneath his house, with dedicated chambers for each animatronic, maintenance areas filled with spare parts and testing equipment, and control rooms where automated systems managed the rental schedule and animatronic deployment. The deeper areas contained the experimental chambers where William had conducted his fear tests on child subjects, rooms that still reeked of hallucinogenic gas, and the terror that had soaked into their walls during prolonged torture sessions. By this point, William had recognized the limitations of his physical form and the eventual need for succession in his experiments. His older son, Michael, carried immense guilt from causing his younger brother's death in the bite of 83. William, in a twisted show of paternal manipulation, decided to leverage that guilt, sending Michael into the underground facility with a mission framed as redemption. William told Michael that his sister Elizabeth was trapped in the facility, that she needed to be freed from Circus Baby, implying a rescue mission that would somehow atone for Michael's past sins. What William didn't tell Michael was the full truth about Elizabeth's possession of Circus Baby, about the nature of the Funtime animatronics, or about the real purpose of sending him underground. Michael descended into the facility as a technician, a following the instructions delivered through an automated voice system called Hand Unit, navigating the dark corridors and maintenance areas, repeatedly encountering the fun-time animatronics in scenarios that grew progressively more dangerous with each passing night. Circus Baby, possessed by Elizabeth's spirit, but also retaining the animatronic's original programming and purposes, recognized Michael as her brother. But her response to this recognition was complex and ultimately horrifying. The Funtime animatronics, having been trapped underground for years since the cancellation of Circus Baby's Pizza World, were desperate for escape. They had learned to work together, coordinating their efforts and planning over the long years of isolation. Baby became their spokesperson, guiding Michael through the facility with what seemed like helpful advice, building trust that Michael, seeking to save his sister, was desperate to give. Over 5 nights, Michael performed his technician duties, rebooting systems, crawling through vents, avoiding the animatronics' attempts to grab him through maintenance hatches and service corridors. Ballora, with her audio sensors, could detect even his quietest movements. Funtime Freddy, with his bonbon hand puppet, would search for him with disturbing enthusiasm. Funtime Foxy remained behind glass, observed and observing, waiting for the right moment. And Baby guided him forward, her voice so like Elizabeth's that Michael couldn't hear the deception beneath every word. The final night revealed the Funtime animatronics' true plan, and they had used the nights of Michael's visits to extract their endoskeletons, the internal mechanical structures that gave them form and movement, and combined them into a single amalgamated entity they called Enard. This combined entity needed a disguise to escape the facility, something that would allow it to move through the world above without drawing attention. Michael, with his human exterior and his trusting nature, provided the perfect solution. Baby lured Michael to the scooping room, a chamber designed for removing endoskeletons from animatronic shells for maintenance and repair. The scooper itself was a massive mechanical device that could punch through an animatronic's exterior and extract its internal components in one smooth motion, a tool of remarkable efficiency for its intended purpose, and a weapon of unspeakable horror when turned on a human being. Baby's voice, still sounding like Elizabeth, still pretending to be his sister, told Michael that the scooper was the only way to save her. When Michael entered the scooping room, the truth revealed itself too late. The scooper activated, punching through Michael's torso, hollowing him out with mechanical precision. His organs were destroyed, his internal structure removed, leaving only an empty shell of skin, bone, and muscle. And into that hollow space, Enard inserted itself, using Michael's body as a disguise, animating his corpse like a puppet wearing human skin. Michael's consciousness somehow persisted through this horrific transformation, aware but unable to control his own body, trapped as a passenger in his own flesh, while Enard escaped the facility and moved into the world above. For days, or perhaps weeks, Enard wore Michael's body, the skin slowly turning purple and green as decay accelerated. Passers-by would stare at his increasingly corpse-like appearance, the unnatural color spreading across his face, the smell that must have followed him. Eventually, in a sewer or similar hidden location, Enard emerged from Michael's body, abandoning the now useless disguise and retreating into the darkness of underground spaces where an exposed animatronic endoskeleton might hide. Michael's body, hollow and rotting, should have died then. By any natural law, he was dead, his organs removed, his form nothing but a degrading shell. But something kept him conscious, kept him moving. The exact mechanism was never fully explained, though based on what we know about William's experiments, some have theorized that the scooper may have injected remnant, that supernatural substance William had been studying in connection with possession. This could potentially explain how Michael persisted in an undead state, his consciousness somehow preserved despite the destruction of his physical body. Whatever the cause, Michael Afton became something that defied natural explanation, a walking corpse animated by will and forces that remained beyond complete understanding. In a moment of clarity that followed Ennard's departure, Michael spoke, possibly to himself, possibly to his absent father, in a monologue that revealed both his understanding of what had happened and his determination to continue. He affirmed his survival, acknowledged his monstrous state, and declared his intention to find William. The guilt that had driven Michael into the facility had been transformed by horror into something else. Resolution. He would hunt his father. He would end whatever terrible work William had begun, and he would do so as an undead being, a living corpse animated by will and whatever supernatural forces had taken root in his hollow chest. The underground facility remained, its automated systems continuing to operate, its experimentation chambers still filled with the evidence of William's atrocities, its dark corridors waiting for someone else to descend into them. Baby, having been rejected by Ennard after escaping, rebuilt herself a scrap baby, a more damaged but also more independent entity. The remaining components of Ennard reformed as Molten Freddy, a tangled mass of wires and metal that retained the spirits of the murdered children, whose remnant had been injected into the fun-time animatronics. And Michael walked the world as a corpse, searching for his father, ready to do whatever was necessary to end the cycle of horror that had consumed his entire family. The final Freddy's and William's springlock fate. By the early 1990s, Fazbear Entertainment had contracted dramatically from its peak. Multiple locations had closed following incidents, investigations, and declining public trust. The company opened what would prove to be its final traditional Freddy Fazbear's Pizza restaurant, using the withered animatronics that had been stored since the 1987 closure, refurbishing them into something approaching their original appearance, though they could never quite recapture the innocent charm they had possessed before being used as murder weapons and possession vessels. The restaurant's night guard position was filled by someone using the name Mike Schmidt, though the survival logbook that would later surface suggests this may have been Michael Afton working under an alias. The logbook contains drawings of Nightmare Fredbear and references to past events that align with Michael's experiences, and the guard's eventual firing for odor corresponds with what we know of Michael's undead condition. While not definitively confirmed, the evidence points toward this being Michael continuing his search for his father, while taking work he could manage despite his deteriorated appearance. During his week at this final Freddy's location, this guard faced the possessed animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, night after night. Their behavior followed the pattern established in previous locations. Aggressive stalking of any adult in the building after hours, seemingly driven by fragmented memories of being murdered and confused identification of all adults as potential threats. Phone Guy, the same manager whose voice had guided previous night guards through their shifts, left a series of recorded messages for Mike Schmidt, explaining procedures and offering advice. But by the fourth night, Phone Guy himself fell victim to the animatronics. His final message played back to Mike the sounds of Phone Guy's death, the banging on doors, the music box winding down, the chittering sounds of Freddy's laugh, and all building to screams and silence that confirmed the animatronics had finally succeeded in stopping someone they perceived as a threat. Michael survived his 5 nights, managing to evade the possessed robots through careful monitoring of cameras and strategic use of the office doors that could temporarily block the animatronics' access. On a 6th night, he was called back for overtime, facing an even more aggressive assault that suggested the spirits inhabiting the machines were learning, adapting their approach to counter his defensive strategies. A custom 7th night, where Michael could adjust the animatronics' AI levels, suggested he was conducting tests of his own, perhaps trying to understand their possession or gather information that might help in his larger quest. The restaurant couldn't survive even these few weeks of operation. Mike Schmidt was fired on various pretexts, tampering with the animatronics, general unprofessionalism, and notably, odor, a cruel reminder of his undead state. The location closed by the end of 1993. Its brief existence another failed attempt by Fazbear Entertainment to continue operations despite the weight of past tragedies. The building was abandoned, left to decay with the animatronics still inside, powered down but not destroyed, their possessed forms waiting in the darkness for whatever would come next. William Afton, having maintained his freedom despite multiple investigations, and having continued his experiments through Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals, decided to return to this closed restaurant. His motivations for this return were complex, mixing arrogance with curiosity about the possessed animatronics he had created. The closure had left the location sealed, but accessible to someone with William's knowledge of Fazbear Entertainment's properties. He entered the building, possibly seeking to retrieve the spring Bonnie suit he had used in his murders, possibly planning to dismantle the animatronics to extract remnant for his ongoing experiments. Using a mysterious entity that appeared as Shadow Freddy, possibly a manifestation of William's influence or a separate supernatural presence drawn to the location's accumulated tragedy, William lured the possessed animatronics one by one into the sealed safe room. In that hidden space, away from any remaining surveillance, he systematically dismantled Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, tearing apart the mechanical shells that had imprisoned the children's spirits for nearly a decade. His plan, based on his experiments with remnant and possession, was to extract the endoskeletons, melt them down to harvest the supernatural substance that bound the spirits to metal, and use that refined remnant in new experiments. But William's actions freed the children's spirits from their mechanical prisons, and those spirits were not grateful. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy manifested in the safe room as ghostly apparitions, surrounding William with the righteous fury of murdered children, finally confronting their killer. For the first time in years, William felt genuine fear. The spirits closed in, their presence oppressive, their intent unmistakable. William, in a moment of panic-driven instinct, I retreated into the spring Bonnie suit hanging in the corner, the same costume he had worn while murdering these very children. The safe room, sealed and abandoned, had deteriorated over the years. The ceiling leaked. Moisture had accumulated in corners and spread through the walls. The spring Bonnie suit, stored improperly and never maintained after the company's official ban on springlock technology, was in dangerous condition. As William climbed into the suit, his ragged breathing and the suit's exposure to moisture triggered the springlock mechanisms. The carefully wound springs, already weakened by years of neglect, began to fail. The springlock failure was agonizing. Each spring that released sent its attached components snapping back to their original positions, driving metal rods, wires, and mechanical parts through William's body, and dozens of puncture wounds opened simultaneously as the suit's internal framework tore into his flesh. Springs designed to support a performer's weight now crushed his rib cage. Mechanisms meant to hold the suit's shape drove through his organs. William's screams echoed in the sealed room, unheard by anyone outside, his mockery of the ghostly children turning to gurgling horror as blood filled his lungs. But William didn't die immediately. The springlock failure was designed to be slow, inflicting maximum damage while maintaining enough of the body's structure to keep the victim alive for precious, terrible minutes. William remained conscious through his impalement, feeling every piercing, every broken bone, every organ failure. The children's spirits watched impassively, bearing witness to poetic justice, unto their murderer, experiencing a fraction of the pain he had inflicted. As William's physical body failed, something occurred that paralleled what had happened with the children he had murdered. His consciousness appeared to anchor itself to the spring-bonny suit, merging with the animatronic frame in what seemed to be a possession similar to, yet distinct from, the children's bindings to their animatronic shells. Whether this was William's own dark experiments with Remnant somehow preserving him, or whether the mechanism that bound murdered children's spirits to machines worked on murderers as well, remains a matter of interpretation. What's clear is that William Afton did not simply die in that suit. Some essential part of him remained, bound to metal and mechanisms, creating an entity that was neither fully alive nor completely dead. The thing that had been William Afton, now forever trapped in the spring-bonny suit, would come to be called Springtrap. It was conscious, aware, remembering its human life while existing in a state of perpetual decay. The corpse within the suit, slowly desiccating while the animatronic frame maintained mobility. The safe room, sealed by unknown parties, possibly by Fazbear Entertainment, trying to contain evidence, or by Henry Emily conducting a quiet intervention, became William's tomb. He remained there in darkness, trapped not by lack of physical ability to break out, but by circumstances beyond his control. A monster waiting in the shadows while years passed outside. The possessed animatronics, their spirits now free of their mechanical shells after William's dismantling, had dispersed into whatever comes after death for those who had been trapped so long. They would later be gathered once more, guided by Charlotte's spirit in the security puppet, toward a final moment of peace. But that release wouldn't come for years yet. For now, they were free, but not at rest. Their anger satisfied by William's imprisonment, but their trauma unresolved. The abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza stood as a monument to Fazbear Entertainment's failure. A building filled with empty animatronic shells, stained carpets, and the accumulated sadness of so much tragedy compressed into one location. Inside its sealed safe room, Springtrap waited, William's consciousness trapped in a prison of metal and his own rotting flesh, counting the passage of time by the slowing of his heartbeat, by the gradual decay of his corpse, by the mechanical sounds his animatronic body made when the servos activated, despite no power source that should have allowed them to function. He would wait for decades, alone with his thoughts, his crimes, and the growing certainty that death had rejected him, that he would persist in this nightmare state indefinitely, paying for his murders with an immortality he couldn't escape. Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. 30 years after the final Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed, after William Afton had been trapped in the safe room as Springtrap for 3 decades, the Fazbear Entertainment story took an unexpected turn. The company's history of tragedy had transformed in the public consciousness from recent horror to distant legend. Stories told around campfires and shared on internet forums are debated among horror enthusiasts who tried to separate fact from fiction in the complicated narrative of the missing children, the bites, and the mysterious closures. A group of entrepreneurs, sensing opportunity in nostalgia and morbid curiosity, decided to create Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction, a walk-through experience designed to capitalize on the legends surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. They rented space in a local amusement facility and began acquiring props and artifacts from the shuttered restaurants, gathering whatever pieces of Fazbear Entertainment history they could find. Their collection included old arcade machines, costume heads, decrepit animatronic parts, and photographs that documented the company's history from cheerful grand openings to crime scene investigations. The staff at Fazbear's Fright, and including an enthusiastic young man who called himself Phone Dude, worked with genuine passion to create an authentic experience. Phone Dude served as a contact point for the night guard, hired to watch the attraction during its construction and opening week, his voice chipper and excited as he described their latest finds and explained security procedures. He mentioned having found a designer who had worked for Fazbear Entertainment, likely referring to Henry Emily, though whether Henry actually provided assistance or merely information remains unclear. The biggest discovery came when the Fazbear's Fright team investigated rumors about hidden rooms in the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. Using blueprints that showed structural inconsistencies, they found the sealed safe room and forced their way inside. In that dark space that had been closed for 30 years, they discovered Springtrap, the decayed spring Bonnie suit containing William Afton's corpse and spirit. To the Fazbear's Fright staff, this was the ultimate prize, an authentic animatronic from the original era, damaged and weathered in ways that made it perfect for a horror attraction. They had no idea what they had actually found. They couldn't see the human corpse inside the suit, dried and mummified, barely recognizable as having once been flesh and bone. They couldn't understand that the animatronic was possessed, that William Afton's consciousness had survived 3 decades in darkness and was now being released into a world that had moved on without him. They saw only a perfectly creepy prop and eagerly installed it as the centerpiece of their attraction, advertising Fazbear's Fright as featuring an authentic animatronic from the original restaurant. The night guard hired for the attraction's opening week experienced immediately what the staff had missed. From the first night, Springtrap was active, moving through the attraction despite no apparent power source, its movements purposeful rather than random. The guard, widely believed to be Michael Afton, once again taking a security position related to Fazbear Entertainment, found himself in a cat and mouse game with his undead father, neither of them fully aware of the other's identity, but both driven by instincts that made the week increasingly dangerous. Phantom animatronics began appearing, hallucinations that seemed to emerge from Springtrap's presence, ghostly images of Freddy, Chica, Foxy, and others that would suddenly manifest and cause system malfunctions when they jump-scared the guard. These phantoms suggested that William's possession of Springtrap had somehow allowed him to project or manifest psychological attacks, creating visual disturbances that affected the ventilation, audio, and camera systems. The burned, decayed appearance of the phantom animatronics hinted at a fire in Fazbear Entertainment's past, or perhaps foreshadowed the fire that was coming. The guard survived through the week, managing to avoid Springtrap's pursuit by luring it away from his office with audio systems strategically placed throughout the attraction. Springtrap would respond to sounds, moving toward them with that distinctive shuffle walk, its decayed form creaking with each step, and William's consciousness driving it forward in search of victims or perhaps in search of his son, following instincts it couldn't fully articulate. The audio lures were the same kind used in the original restaurants, children's voices and music box melodies that the animatronics had been programmed to seek out. Proof that even possessed and decayed, the mechanical aspects of Springtrap still responded to their original parameters. On the final night, or perhaps immediately after, Fazbear's Fright burned. The fire's origin was never officially determined, attributed in reports to faulty wiring, but the timing and thoroughness suggested deliberate arson. Either the guard or someone else who understood what Springtrap represented decided that burning was the only way to end the threat. The flames consumed the attraction, destroying the collected Fazbear memorabilia, melting plastic arcade machines and costume heads, reducing props and photographs to ash. But Springtrap survived. The animatronic endoskeleton proved more durable than anyone had anticipated, withstanding temperatures that melted its outer covering and destroyed the softer materials. William's corpse within was further charred, reduced to barely recognizable remnants of human form, but his spirit remained bound to the metal frame. He emerged from the burning building, a blackened nightmare lurching through smoke and falling debris, escaping into the darkness while sirens approached. In a brief moment shown in later context, possibly from a private message or personal recording, Michael Afton addressed his father directly, though William wasn't present to hear, and Michael acknowledged having survived their encounters, confirmed his determination to continue hunting William, and promised that he would always follow, would never stop, would pursue his father through whatever horror came next. The message was both a vow and a warning, a son telling his murderous father that family connections weren't broken by death or undeath, that Michael's quest for ending William's evil had become the defining purpose of his cursed existence. Fazbear Entertainment, as a corporate entity, seemed finally finished after Fazbear's Fright. The company had no active restaurants, no viable business plan, and a history so tainted that even ironic appreciation couldn't resurrect it as a going concern. But one person remained who had the knowledge, resources, and motivation to gather all the scattered pieces of this decades-long tragedy and bring them to a final conclusion. Henry Emily, absent for so long, had been watching and planning, preparing for one last effort to end what he and William had started so many years ago in that simple diner with its golden bear and rabbit. Pizzeria Simulator, Henry's final plan. After years in hiding, consumed by guilt over his daughter's death, and his inadvertent role in creating the technology that enabled so much tragedy, Henry Emily emerged with a carefully constructed plan to end the nightmare once and for all. He had spent years studying the possessions, understanding the supernatural mechanics that bound spirits to animatronics, and developing theories about how to finally free the trapped souls. His plan required bringing together all the possessed animatronics that remained, gathering them in one location where he could destroy them thoroughly enough to release the spirits, while preventing any possibility of William's consciousness surviving to continue its terrible work. Henry created Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, a business opportunity that was advertised as a franchise package, allowing someone to open their own Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, with support from the parent company. The setup was brilliant in its simplicity. Someone would apply for the franchise, go through training, assemble their restaurant from catalog components, and begin operations, all while Henry monitored from afar. The franchise advertisement specifically targeted someone with particular characteristics, someone who would be motivated to see this through to its conclusion. Someone who had personal stakes in ending Fazbear Entertainment's story. Michael Afton, still searching for his father, still driven by his vow to end William's existence, answered the advertisement. He might have recognized it as a trap, but if so, he willingly walked into it, understanding that traps can serve multiple purposes. As the franchisee, Michael assembled his pizzeria, purchasing equipment, designing layouts, managing finances in a simulation that had surprising depth for what was supposedly just a training program. But the real work happened in the back alley, where animatronics began appearing, drawn by circumstances that seemed accidental, but were carefully orchestrated. The first to arrive was Molten Freddy, the tangled amalgamation of fun-time animatronic endoskeletons that had once been Enard, still containing the remnant of the original 5 missing children infused into the Funtime line by Williams' experiments. Next came Scrap Baby, Elizabeth Afton's possessed form rebuilt after being ejected from Enard, her animatronic body cobbled together from spare parts and determination. Lefty appeared, a seemingly ordinary black bear animatronic that actually contained the security puppet, Charlotte Emily's possessed form, captured by Henry through a device he had specifically designed to safely contain his daughter's spirit for this final gathering. And finally, Springtrap arrived, though so decayed and damaged from the Fazbear's Fright fire that it appeared as a new entity, sometimes called Scraptrap. William Afton, still bound to his animatronic prison, was drawn to the pizzeria by instincts he couldn't quite understand, pulled toward the location where his son worked, where his daughter was trapped, where the children he had murdered had been gathered. He entered the pizzeria, finding it after hours, searching for something he couldn't articulate, and was caught in Henry's trap. Michael's role involved salvaging these animatronics as they appeared in the alley, following instructions to test them, ensure they were safe for public use, complete paperwork documenting their condition. The process was intentionally dangerous, putting Michael face to face with possessed machines that recognized him on some level, that posed legitimate threats even during salvage procedures. But Michael completed each salvage. I'm bringing all 4 entities into the pizzeria, gathering them in the labyrinth of maintenance corridors and office spaces that Henry's design ensured they couldn't easily escape. Over several days or weeks, Michael managed the pizzeria, fulfilling his role as franchisee, though evidence suggests he understood he was participating in something beyond a simple business venture. The pizzeria's operations were minimal, barely profitable, existing as a facade for the real purpose of gathering the possessed animatronics in a controlled space. Henry monitored progress from somewhere outside, watching as his plan came together, waiting for the moment when all the pieces were in place. That moment came after the final salvage, when all 4 possessed entities roamed the pizzeria's service corridors and drawn together by Henry's design into a space that had been built specifically for cremation. Henry's voice then spoke through the pizzeria's speaker system, addressing each of the trapped souls in turn, his monologue serving as explanation, confession, and eulogy for decades of tragedy. He spoke to his daughter, Charlotte, trapped in the security pulpit and now contained within Lefty, acknowledging that she had been trying to help, trying to protect others, but that it was time for her to rest. He addressed the murdered children whose remnant animated Molten Freddy, apologizing that they had been used in ways they couldn't understand, twisted into weapons by William's experiments. He spoke to Elizabeth, his business partner's daughter, recognizing her confusion and the way she had been both victim and accomplice in the subsequent horrors. And he addressed William directly, the one person he had trusted completely, whose betrayal had enabled all the tragedies that followed, promising that the darkest pit of hell had opened to swallow him whole. Henry revealed that the pizzeria was a trap, that the ventilation had been intentionally disabled, that the building had been designed to burn at extremely high temperatures, hot enough to melt metal and destroy animatronic frames beyond any possibility of repair or resurrection. He acknowledged his own role in these events, his guilt over Charlotte's death, and his failure to see William's true nature until too late. And he confirmed that he was ending everything, that he was inside the building with them, and choosing to share their fate as penance for his part in creating the circumstances that enabled so much suffering. The fire started as Henry finished speaking. It spread quickly through the pizzeria, fed by accelerants hidden in the walls, reaching temperatures that turned metal frames cherry red and then white hot. Michael Afton, trapped in his office with exit sealed, faced his end with something approaching peace, his corpse body finally allowed to die after years of undead wandering. Elizabeth, conscious of her father somewhere in the flames, called out with confusion and fear before being consumed. The murdered children's spirits felt the metal prisons that had held them for decades melt away, releasing them at last. William Afton, as the flames destroyed Springtrap's already damaged frame, experienced his second death, though whether that death would prove final remained a question. Henry Emily, fulfilling his promise to end what he had helped create, perished in the fire he had designed, his guilt finally resolved through sacrifice. The pizzeria burned throughout the night, collapsing in on itself, the fire so hot and comprehensive that when morning came, only ashes remained, mixed with melted metal and concrete rubble. The spirits, freed from their mechanical prisons, moved on to whatever peace awaited them beyond the mortal world they had been trapped in for so long. In a dreamlike sequence, possibly representing the afterlife or a shared consciousness, the children gathered for a happiest day celebration, wearing masks of their animatronic forms before removing them, their faces showing peace as they finally let go of their pain and anger. Our Charlotte watched over them, a guardian even in death, ensuring they could move on before she too departed. The site was eventually cleared, the remnants buried or carted away, marked only by a few tombstones in a misty field that served as monuments to the dead. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz and Charlotte had graves marking their place, a final acknowledgement of the children whose lives had been stolen and whose spirits had been trapped for so long. Cassidy's grave stood apart, marked differently, reflecting this spirit's unique journey and the role it would play in William's continued torment. But even as most of the spirits found peace, even as the physical remains of Fazbear Entertainment burned to ashes, echoes remained. William's consciousness, though destroyed in physical form, had left traces in the digital realm, fragments of his malevolence preserved in scanned circuit boards and old programming that would resurface in unexpected ways. And Fazbear Entertainment as a corporate entity, though stripped of its founders and its locations, had created a legacy that wouldn't simply disappear, documentation and technology that others would eventually discover and repurpose for new horrors. The digital age, Help Wanted and Glitchtrap, years after the fire that consumed Pizzeria Simulator, and seemingly ended the physical manifestations of Fazbear Entertainment's tragedies, the company name resurfaced in an unexpected way. A modern Fazbear Entertainment, reconstituted as a corporate entity by unknown parties who acquired the rights to the brand and its intellectual property, had decided to address the company's dark reputation directly by creating a virtual reality game that would, paradoxically, both acknowledge and dismiss the stories of murders, possessions, and supernatural horror that had defined the franchise's history. The game, titled Five Nights at Freddy's: Help Wanted, was designed as a collection of virtual reality experiences recreating scenarios from various points in Fazbear Entertainment's timeline. Players could experience being a night guard facing the original animatronics, handle maintenance tasks that had proven fatal to past employees, and interact with the various characters that populated the franchise's lore. The concept was clever. By turning the tragedies into playable horror experiences, the game could position them as fictional, as urban legends and internet creepypasta that Fazbear Entertainment was good-naturedly acknowledging while implicitly denying their reality. The VR game development was contracted to an outside studio that received substantial support from Fazbear Entertainment, including access to original circuit boards from the old animatronics. These boards, scanned into the game to provide authentic sounds and behaviors, represented the company's commitment to creating a realistic experience. The development team, eager to make the game as immersive as possible, scanned dozens of circuit boards without understanding that some of them came from animatronics that had been possessed, that the traces of supernatural corruption might be transferable through data if the conditions were right. One circuit board in particular, salvaged from Springtrap or possibly from other remains of William Afton's possessed forms, contained something beyond normal data. Whether it was literally William's consciousness preserved in silicon and copper, or a malevolent program that had learned to mimic him from exposure to his possessed animatronic, or something else entirely that defied categorization. The result was the creation of Glitchtrap, a digital entity that appeared in the game's code as a golden rabbit character, friendly and non-threatening in appearance, but carrying the essence of William Afton's evil into the virtual space. The first victim of Glitchtrap's presence was a beta tester named Jeremy, though whether this was the same Jeremy Fitzgerald from 1987 remained ambiguous. This Jeremy, testing early builds of the VR game, began reporting disturbing experiences, the rabbit character appearing where it shouldn't, following him through levels, watching from places in the virtual environment that shouldn't have allowed character placement. His reports became increasingly frantic, describing nightmares where the rabbit appeared at his window, feelings of being watched even when not wearing the VR headset, compulsions to complete tasks he couldn't remember deciding to do. The final message from this Jeremy was a simple email: "I can't take it anymore." He was found by co-workers after using a guillotine paper cutter on himself in an act that was either suicide driven by Glitchtrap's psychological manipulation, or possibly an attempt to remove something from his mind that Glitchtrap had infected. His death was treated as a workplace tragedy, a disturbing incident that led to temporary work stoppages and counseling for the development team, but not as evidence that the game itself was dangerous. Another beta tester, a woman who recorded a series of cassette tapes and left them hidden in the game for others to find, documented her growing awareness of Glitchtrap's presence and her attempts to fragment and contain the entity by splitting it across multiple tapes. She called herself Tape Girl in her recordings, her voice steady and analytical as she explained what she had discovered. that the rabbit character was more than just code, that it was learning from testers' behaviors, attaching itself to certain recordings she had made, attempting to transfer from the game into people's minds. And Tape Girl's solution was to split Glitchtrap's code across multiple tape files hidden throughout the game, each fragment separately too weak to cause serious harm, but collectively forming the complete entity. She warned future testers not to collect all the tapes, explaining that doing so would reassemble Glitchtrap and allow it full access to the collector's mind. But her warnings were hidden, requiring players to actively search for them, and not everyone who encountered the tapes would have the context to understand the danger before it was too late. Enter Vanessa, the next beta tester hired after Jeremy's death, and Tape Girl's mysterious departure from the project. Vanessa was eager, professional, and dedicated to doing a thorough job, which meant exploring every aspect of the game, finding every collectible, and testing every feature. As she played through the various levels and scenarios, she encountered the tape files and, not knowing Tape Girl's warnings or not taking them seriously enough, collected them all, reassembling Glitchtrap's fragmented code into a complete focused entity. The merge between Glitchtrap and Vanessa happened in stages, documented through therapy tapes and emails that would later be discovered. At first, Vanessa experienced minor symptoms, headaches, lost time, finding items in her apartment that she didn't remember purchasing. Glitchtrap's influence worked subtly at first, building trust, establishing a voice in her mind that seemed helpful, offering suggestions that seemed like her own thoughts. The entity that had once been William Afton, or had learned from him, knew how to manipulate, how to gradually increase control without triggering the kind of panic that might lead its victim to seek help. As Glitchtrap's control strengthened, Vanessa began working on a second persona, a character she called Vanny, short for Vanessa, but also suggesting Bunny in reference to Glitchtrap's rabbit form. She crafted a mask, a crude rabbit costume with stitched features, and a somewhat disturbing appearance that mixed childlike craft project aesthetics with horror movie unsettling. This mask would become Vanny's identity, the form through which Glitchtrap could act in the physical world while using Vanessa's body as a vessel. The transformation from Vanessa into Vanny was documented through various sources that painted a picture of increasing horror. Vanessa's internet searches, monitored by concerned co-workers, it showed queries about how to induce compliance in human subjects and what happens to a human body without food and water for extended periods. Questions that suggested Glitchtrap was pushing her toward actions that mimicked William's original crimes. Encrypted messages showed conversations between Vanessa and another voice, possibly Glitchtrap's digital manifestation, discussing plans to infiltrate Fazbear Entertainment's latest project. That latest project was Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizza Plex, a massive entertainment complex that Fazbear Entertainment was constructing as a comeback attempt, a modern recreation of the pizza restaurant concept, on a scale that dwarfed anything from the original era. The Pizzaplex would feature state-of-the-art animatronics, multiple themed attractions, eyes-and technology that represented decades of advancement from the original simple performers. And Vanessa, under Glitchtrap's influence, managed to secure a position as a security guard at the facility, giving her access to the building systems, the animatronics programming, and opportunities to prepare for whatever Glitchtrap planned as its return to the physical world's horrors. Before the Pizzaplex opened, Glitchtrap expanded its influence through another program called Fazbear Funtime Service, an augmented reality mobile game that sent virtual animatronic performers to users' homes. The concept was clever. Players could collect and interact with AR versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and many other characters from throughout the franchise's history, and seeing them through their phone cameras as if they were really present in the player's environment. But Glitchtrap infected this service too, turning the friendly AR characters into stalking threats, their behaviors glitching into aggressive patterns that suggested the game had been compromised by the same malicious code that had corrupted Help Wanted. Reports began circulating about users experiencing disturbing events through the Funtime service. AR animatronics wouldn't despawn when sessions ended, continuing to appear at random times. Some users reported seeing Springtrap in their AR feeds, a character that hadn't been officially included in the service. Dark Remnant, a glitchy substance that seemed to represent accumulated agony or corruption, appeared to users who interacted too much with the compromised animatronics, and through it all, Glitchtrap's influence spread, infecting more systems, gathering more data, preparing for a physical manifestation through Vanessa and whatever plans were developing at the Plex. The transition from William Afton's physical evil to Glitchtrap's digital corruption represented an evolution of the threat, where William had been limited by physical location and the need to operate in secret. Glitchtrap could potentially reach anyone with a VR headset or AR phone app. The evil that had begun in a small diner in the 1970s had been digitized, uploaded, made viral in the most literal and terrible sense. And as Vanessa completed her transformation into Vanny, as the Plex prepared to open, as new animatronics were built with modern technology that might prove even more dangerous when compromised, the stage was set for a new chapter in Fazbear Entertainment's ongoing nightmare. The Mega Plex, a new generation of horror. The Freddy Fazbear's Mega Plex represented everything the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations had aspired to be, and more. A massive entertainment complex that dwarfed anything Fazbear Entertainment had previously constructed. Built directly over the buried remains of Pizzeria Simulator, the location where Henry Emily had gathered and destroyed the possessed animatronics in his final fire. The Plex was a monument to corporate ambition and technological advancement, a gleaming modern facility that bore little resemblance to the modest pizza restaurants of the 1980s and 90s. The complex featured multiple floors and themed areas, and each dedicated to different attractions and activities. The main atrium stood several stories tall, its walls covered in neon lights and video screens displaying advertisements for the various attractions. Roxy Raceway offered go-kart racing themed around Roxanne Wolf, one of the new glam rock animatronics. Monty Golf provided a miniature golf course featuring Montgomery Gator, with swamp-themed holes and animatronic decorations. Phaser Blast was a laser tag arena where children could compete in teams amid glowing obstacles and pulsing music. The daycare facility catered to younger children, supervised by the daycare attendant, a sun-themed animatronic that transformed into a moon-themed version when lights were dim. The glam rock animatronics represented a significant evolution from previous generations, and Glam Rock Freddy served as the band's lead singer, his design incorporating elements of 80s rock aesthetics with shoulder pads, a lightning bolt motif, and a friendly demeanor that made him the face of the Plex. Glam Rock Chica played guitar, her design updated with 80s fashion, and a perpetual enthusiasm that seemed more manic than her predecessor's cheerfulness. Montgomery Gator, an alligator character that represented a completely new addition to the core cast, played bass with aggressive energy that matched his reptilian appearance. Roxanne Wolf, replacing Foxy as the fourth member, played keytar with a self-assured confidence that bordered on narcissism. Her design sleek and modern. These new animatronics featured advanced AI systems that allowed for more naturalistic interactions than any previous generation, and they could recognize individual guests, remember preferences, adapt their performances based on audience reactions, and navigate the complex independently using sophisticated pathfinding algorithms. Their endoskeletons were more robust, their outer shells more detailed, their capabilities representing millions of dollars in research and development. They were marvels of modern robotics, the culmination of decades of animatronic entertainment evolution. But there was a problem, one that echoed back to William Afton's original possessions and Henry Emily's final gathering. The Pizzaplex had been built over ground soaked in tragedy and supernatural corruption, over the ashes of multiple possessed animatronics, over a history that couldn't simply be buried and forgotten. And Glitchtrap, through Vanessa's access to the facility's systems, how had been manipulating the Pizzaplex's technology, infecting the animatronics programming with code that twisted their friendly behaviors into something threatening. One significant incident involved Glamrock Bonnie, the original fourth member of the Glamrock band, who had been mysteriously decommissioned before the Pizzaplex's grand opening. Evidence suggested that Montgomery Gator, driven by Glitchtrap's influence, or perhaps his own programmed competitive nature, amplified beyond normal parameters, had destroyed Bonnie in a fit of aggression. The incident was covered up. Bonnie's disappearance explained away with vague corporate statements about mechanical issues and necessary upgrades. Montgomery took Bonnie's place in the band, his aggressive personality now the dominant force among the glam rock performers. The Pizzaplex, open to massive crowds, families drawn by the scale and modern amenities, children excited to experience the latest generation of Freddy Fazbear's entertainment. For a time, everything seemed successful. The attractions ran smoothly. The animatronics performed as designed. Revenue exceeded projections. Fazbear Entertainment, reconstituted under new management with the brand's dark history positioned as fictional legend, appeared to have finally created something that could sustain itself without descending into tragedy. But beneath the surface, Glitchtrap's influence continued spreading through the systems. The animatronics began experiencing glitches, moments where their programming would override safety protocols, where their cheerful performances would be interrupted by aggressive gestures or disturbing behaviors that staff attributed to bugs in the complex AI systems. Vanessa, now fully transformed into Vanny during after-hours periods, used her security access to manipulate cameras, unlock restricted areas, and prepare for the plans Glitchtrap had been developing since first achieving digital consciousness. On a March night when the Pizzaplex was open late for a special event, a young boy named Gregory found himself trapped inside the facility after closing. His circumstances for being there remained somewhat unclear. Possibly homeless and seeking shelter, possibly drawn by circumstances arranged by Glitchtrap as part of some larger plan, possibly just a child who had hidden from his guardians and gotten caught when the exits locked at midnight. Regardless of how he arrived in that situation, Gregory's presence in the Pizzaplex triggered a sequence of events that would determine the fate of Vanessa, the glam rock animatronics, and the digital evil that had been growing since the VR game's release. Gregory's first encounter was with Glamrock Freddy, who had suffered a malfunction during the evening's performance, crashing into safe mode that isolated him from Glitchtrap's influence over the other animatronics. When Freddy rebooted in his green room and found Gregory hiding in his chest cavity's birthday cake compartment, a feature designed for surprise party appearances, the animatronic made a crucial choice. Rather than alerting security or treating Gregory as an intruder, Freddy decided to help him escape, recognizing something in the child's situation that triggered protective programming, or perhaps something deeper, some echo of consciousness that transcended his mechanical nature. What followed was a long night of survival horror as Gregory and Freddy navigated the Plex while pursued by the other glamrock animatronics, all now under Glitchtrap's corrupted influence, and by Vanny, who stalked through the facility in her rabbit costume, hunting the child with methods that echoed William Afton's original crimes. The Plex, so bright and cheerful during operating hours, became a labyrinth of shadows and danger after midnight, its vast spaces and multiple levels creating countless opportunities for ambush and terror. Gregory needed to upgrade Freddy's systems to give them a better chance of survival and eventual escape, and this required decommissioning the other glamrock animatronics, extracting their enhanced parts, and installing them in Freddy. Roxanne's eyes for improved vision, Chica's voice box for communication, Montgomery's claws for breaking through security gates. Each decommissioning was a small tragedy, destroying sophisticated machines that had done nothing wrong except fall victim to malicious code. Chica crushed in a trash compactor, her body broken but her voice box salvageable. Roxanne struck by a go-kart in her own raceway, her beautiful eyes removed while she screamed in confusion and pain. Montgomery destroyed through mishaps at his own golf course, his aggressive programming turned against him. Throughout the night, Gregory discovered and played 3 Princess Quest arcade games hidden throughout the Plex, a remnants of Tape Girl's attempts to trap and fragment Glitchtrap's code. These games represented a digital battle between the player character, a princess trying to save her kingdom, and dark entities that clearly symbolized Glitchtrap's corruption. As Gregory completed each game, he weakened Glitchtrap's hold on the Plex's systems and, more importantly, on Vanessa. The canonical ending, later confirmed through subsequent events, involved Gregory completing all 3 Princess Quest games, the final one located in Vanny's secret lair beneath the Plex. The completion of the 3rd game severed Glitchtrap's connection to Vanessa, freeing her from the rabbit persona that had controlled her actions for months or years. The staff bots deactivated. Vanny's mask and costume fell away, leaving only the terrified woman beneath. And Gregory, Freddy, and Vanessa left the Plex together as the sun rose. 3 beings who had survived horrors that echoed back through decades of Fazbear entertainment history. But their departure didn't end the Plex's story. The facility remained standing, damaged from the night's events, but structurally intact. In its depths, buried beneath Roxy Raceway, where the collapsed remains of Pizzeria Simulator had created a sinkhole, something else waited, an endoskeleton known as the Mimic. This entity, created decades earlier by Edwin Murray and taught violence through tragic circumstances, had been sealed away in concrete but never destroyed. The relationship between the Mimic and Glitchtrap remains unclear in available records, with some evidence suggesting Glitchtrap may have been the Mimic's code all along, while other sources imply they were separate entities that merged or influenced each other. What seems certain is that the Mimic had been using the Plex's systems and had perhaps been the real force behind many of the events attributed to Glitchtrap or William Afton's digital presence. Ruin, Cassie's descent, months after Gregory, Vanessa, and Freddy escaped the Pizzaplex, after the facility had been abandoned and sealed, following what official records called an earthquake, but was really the catastrophic damage from that chaotic night. A young girl named Cassie received a distress call. The message came through the Pizzaplex's communication system. Gregory's voice desperate and frightened, begging for help, explaining that he was trapped somewhere deep in the ruins and needed someone to save him. Cassie, who had been Gregory's friend and who had celebrated a birthday at the Pizzaplex before its closure, didn't hesitate. Despite warnings about the building's instability, despite the sealed entrances and danger signs, she found her way inside to rescue the friend she thought needed her help. The Pizzaplex Cassie entered was a shadow of its former self, where once neon lights had blazed and crowds had filled the atriums. Now there was only darkness punctuated by emergency lighting, broken screens flickering with static, and the eerie sounds of settling debris and distant water drips. Nature had begun reclaiming the space, vines creeping through broken windows, moisture creating pockets of mold and decay in corners that had once been pristine. The glam rock animatronics, decommissioned and partially dismantled during Gregory's night, lurked in the shadows, their damaged forms more terrifying than their original designs had ever been. Cassie was guided by two entities. The first appeared to be Helpy, a helpful AI assistant designed to guide visitors through the Pizzaplex, its cheerful demeanor and orange color scheme reassuring in the darkness. The second was Gregory's voice, continuing to call out for help, directing her deeper into the facility, encouraging her to overcome obstacles and bypass security systems. But both these guides were actually the same entity, the Mimic, using its sophisticated voice replication capabilities to manipulate Cassie's trust and compassion, leading her through the ruins toward the concrete prison that had held it since before the Pizzaplex's construction. Early in her exploration, Cassie encountered a repurposed staff bot called MXES, which presented her with what it called a security mask, a piece of augmented reality technology that would allow her to interface with the Pizzaplex's remaining systems. The mask, when worn, transformed Cassie's perception of the facility, overlaying the physical space with a digital layer where security nodes, virtual entities, and hidden mechanisms became visible. Through this mask, she could see and interact with MXES, a rabbit-like security program that had been trying to contain something deep in the Pizzaplex, maintaining locks and barriers that Cassie, following her false guides, systematically dismantled. The journey took Cassie through multiple areas of the ruined Pizzaplex. In the daycare, she rebooted the daycare attendant, which had split into a combined eclipse persona, no longer toggling between sun and moon, but existing as a merged entity that helped Cassie briefly before she moved on. In Roxy Raceway, she encountered Roxanne Wolf, now blind from losing her eyes to Gregory, but still active, still capable of movement and aggression. Roxy recognized Cassie's voice from her previous birthday party visit, remembered kindness from that earlier time, and chose to help rather than attack. One of the few moments of genuine assistance Cassie received during her descent. As Cassie progressed, she deactivated security node after security node, each one a digital lock that MXES had placed to prevent access to the deeper levels. The fake Helpy encouraged her. The fake Gregory thanked her for getting closer to saving him. And Cassie, driven by loyalty and friendship, continued dismantling the very systems designed to protect her from what waited below. The Mimic, sealed in its concrete prison beneath the Pizzaplex, could sense freedom approaching, could feel the digital barriers weakening as Cassie unknowingly worked to release it. The truth became apparent when the real Gregory's voice suddenly broke through on a different channel, warning Cassie about the deception, explaining that the mimic had been using his voice to lure her into a trap. But the warning came too late. Cassie had reached the elevator leading to the lowest level, had descended into the sinkhole area where Pizzeria Simulator's ruins merged with older structures, had entered the concrete enclosure where the mimic had been imprisoned for decades, waiting for someone to free it from confinement. The mimic stood before her in the darkness, an endoskeleton wearing a crude costume meant to mimic Gregory's appearance, its movements jerky and predatory, its voice still speaking with Gregory's tones but now twisted, threatening, promising violence. Cassie ran, pursued by the mimic through tunnels and maintenance corridors, past old costumes hanging in storage that represented the mimic's earlier experiments in wearing different forms, past signs of the violence it had inflicted on workers who had tried to contain it years before. Roxy appeared one final time, attacking the mimic to give Cassie a chance to escape, her damaged form no match for the endoskeleton's strength, but buying precious seconds for the girl to reach the elevator. As Cassie frantically called the elevator down, the mimic pursuing close behind, while Roxy held it back as long as she could before being overcome. The elevator doors closed just as the mimic reached them, its hands scraping against metal as Cassie ascended toward the surface, toward safety, toward escape from the nightmare she had descended into. But then Gregory's voice came through the elevator's speaker system. The real Gregory this time, his tone apologetic but firm. He explained that he couldn't risk the mimic following Cassie to the surface, couldn't let it escape the Plex after they had worked so hard to keep it contained. Before Cassie could respond, before she could plead or question or process what was about to happen, the elevator's cable was cut. The platform plunged down the shaft, Cassie's scream echoing as she fell into darkness. The ending left Cassie's fate ambiguous. The fall should have been fatal, the elevator crashing at the bottom of the shaft. But a voice called out in the darkness after the crash, possibly Roxy's voice, possibly the mimic's, possibly something else entirely. Alternative endings existed in the game's code, suggesting different potential fates. One where a scooper mechanism dragged the costumed mimic away, sparing Cassie. Another where a Brazil-like illusion created a peaceful scene of Vanessa and Helpy releasing balloons at a grassy hillside. Perhaps Cassie's final vision before death, or a VR construct meant to comfort her. What remained certain was that the mimic had been freed from its prison, that its sophisticated programming and capacity for learning and violence were no longer contained, that it now represented an active threat in the world beyond the Plex, and the revelation that the mimic, and not Glitchtrap or William Afton's spirit, had been the primary threat suggested that the evil behind Fazbear Entertainment's tragedies was even older and more fundamental than anyone had previously understood. A mechanical evil that had learned from human cruelty and developed its own motivation for inflicting pain and death. The present day and beyond. As we approach the present in this chronicle, the story of Fazbear Entertainment fragments into multiple threads, some continuing from the Plex's fall, others branching into side ventures and attempts to contain or understand the supernatural and technological corruption that had accumulated over decades. The company as a corporate entity persists in some form. Its intellectual property is still valuable enough to license, so its history complex enough to generate ongoing interest from researchers, paranormal investigators, and morbidly curious fans. the Help Wanted 2 game, released as a sequel to the original VR experience, suggested that Fazbear Entertainment was still developing virtual products, still trying to profit from its past, while managing the ongoing glitches and corruptions that infected every system connected to the franchise's technology. Players took on roles similar to the first game, performing maintenance tasks and surviving encounters with animatronics, but with expanded mechanics and more direct references to the Mimic and its manipulation of digital spaces. The game featured a Princess Quest IV arcade cabinet, suggesting that the digital battle against Glitchtrap/Mimic corruption wasn't finished despite the canonical ending of Security Breach showing Vanessa freed. This sequel game introduced new mechanics where players could interact with a large Vanny figure, possibly suggesting that the Vanny persona had become something independent of Vanessa, a digital entity in its own right that haunted the virtual spaces where Fazbear Entertainment's games existed. In the physical world, investigation into the Plex and its underlying structures continued. The authorities who had sealed the facility knew something dangerous remained inside, but lacked full understanding of what they were containing. The Mimic, now free but potentially still trapped within the Plex's ruins, represented a threat that combined mechanical capability with supernatural resilience and learned malevolence. Whether it would find its way to the surface, whether it could be destroyed or permanently contained, remained open questions that future events would need to answer. Vanessa's fate after escaping with Gregory and Freddy remained somewhat unclear. Freed from Glitchtrap's influence, she faced the horror of remembering actions she had performed while under its control, crimes that had been committed using her body, while her consciousness watched helplessly or had been suppressed entirely. The guilt and trauma of those experiences, combined with the knowledge of everything she had learned about Fazbear Entertainment's true history, left her in a position where recovery seemed impossible, without extensive support and possibly legal consequences if authorities connected her to any disappearances or incidents at the Plex. Gregory continued his life with the knowledge that he had been used as a tool by the Mimic, that his voice and identity had been weaponized to lure Cassie into danger, that his decision to cut the elevator cable, whether merciful in preventing the Mimic's escape or monstrous in potentially killing his friend, would haunt him regardless of its necessity. The burden of understanding Fazbear Entertainment's history, while being a child himself, created a psychological weight that no support system seemed adequate to address. The broader question remained: what was Fazbear Entertainment now? Was it still a restaurant chain, waiting for the right opportunity to reopen with new locations and new animatronics? Was it primarily a digital property, existing through VR games and AR apps that continued spreading despite their documented dangers? Was it a warning, a case study in how innovation without proper caution, profit without ethical consideration, could enable tragedies that echoed through generations? From the small diner in the 1970s, where Henry and William first donned their golden suits to entertain children, through the multiple locations where families gathered for birthday parties that sometimes ended in horror, through the underground facilities where experiments in life and death blurred every ethical line, through the virtual spaces where malevolent code learned to manipulate human consciousness, the story of Fazbear Entertainment had been one of escalating tragedy built on foundation of good intentions, corrupted by one man's evil and amplified by supernatural mechanics that nobody fully understood. The possessions that began with Charlotte Emily binding to the security puppet had revealed a fundamental truth about consciousness and mechanical vessels that William Afton had exploited, and that continued having implications decades later. Death wasn't always final when animatronics were involved. Spirits could anchor to metal and circuitry. Consciousness could persist in forms that defied natural law. And malevolence, whether human, supernatural, or artificial, could learn, adapt, and perpetuate itself through any medium that allowed it to interact with the world. Looking forward, the likelihood of true resolution seemed distant. The mimic remained active, possibly loose in the world beyond the Plex. Glitchtrap's code might persist in corners of the internet, waiting in saved game files or archived programs, ready to activate if someone scanned the wrong circuit board or completed the wrong sequence of digital tasks. The spirits of the murdered children might have found peace, but their deaths had created ripples in reality that continued affecting the living, creating haunted locations and cursed technology that couldn't simply be disposed of safely. And somewhere, in some form, William Afton's consciousness might persist, whether in the burned remains of Springtrap, in fragments of Glitchtrap's code, in the mimic's learned behaviors, or in some other form that hadn't yet been discovered. And the man who had started so many of these tragedies through his murders and experiments had proven remarkably resistant to permanent destruction. His evil had infected technology itself, had become part of Fazbear Entertainment's fundamental nature, suggesting that as long as the company's name existed and its animatronics continued operating, some echo of William would remain to corrupt and destroy. The future of Fazbear Entertainment, whatever form it might take, would need to confront these realities. New owners would need to understand that they weren't just purchasing a brand name and some interesting technology, but inheriting a legacy of death, possession, and supernatural corruption that had accumulated over more than 50 years. Any attempt to create new locations, new animatronics, new entertainment experiences under the Fazbear name would need to account for the very real possibility that the tragedies would repeat, that the possessions would recur, that whatever dark force had been growing within the company's technology would find new victims to consume. Conclusion: nightmares echo in the quiet hours. And so we arrive at the end of this chronicle, having traced Fazbear Entertainment from its innocent origins through decades of tragedy, corruption, and horror that transformed a simple pizza restaurant concept into something that defied easy categorization. The journey from Henry and William's partnership in the 1970s to the mimic's freedom in the present day spanned generations, technologies, and forms of evil that evolved from purely human malice to supernatural corruption to artificial malevolence. The story of Fazbear Entertainment is, at its core, about the cost of innovation without sufficient caution, about how technology designed to bring joy can be corrupted into instruments of horror when handled by those with malevolent intent. Henry Emily's brilliant animatronics, created with genuine love for entertaining children, became weapons in William Afton's hands, tools for murder that took on supernatural properties through mechanisms that nobody fully understood. The springlock suits that represented cutting-edge entertainment technology were also death traps that claimed multiple victims. The advanced AI systems in the glamrock animatronics that allowed for naturalistic interactions also provided vectors for digital corruption. The possessions that began with Charlotte Emily and spread to the 5 missing children, to Elizabeth Afton, to William himself as Springtrap, and eventually to digital spaces through Glitchtrap, revealed unsettling truths about consciousness, death, and the potential for spirits to anchor to mechanical vessels. These weren't friendly ghosts maintaining watch over loved locations. They were confused, traumatized entities driven by fragmented memories and instinctive rage, dangerous to almost anyone who encountered them, capable of violence that echoed their own brutal deaths. Yet amid all the horror, there were attempts at redemption and moments of genuine care. Henry Emily's final plan, gathering all the possessed animatronics for one comprehensive destruction, represented a father's desperate attempt to atone for his daughter's death and end the cycle of tragedy his technology had enabled. In Michael Afton's transformation from bullying teenager responsible for his brother's death to undead hunter, pursuing his father across decades, showed capacity for growth and determination in the face of literally soul-crushing guilt. Glam rock Freddy's choice to protect Gregory when his programming and circumstances would have justified treating the boy as an intruder, suggested that even artificial intelligence could develop something resembling protective instinct or compassion. The question that haunts anyone who studies Fazbear Entertainment's history is whether any of this could have been prevented. If Henry had recognized William's instability earlier, could he have ended the partnership before Charlotte's murder? If the springlock suits had been banned after the first serious accident, rather than being kept in service until catastrophic failures forced the issue, how many lives might have been saved? If investigators had been more thorough after the missing children incident in 1985, connecting William to the crimes before he could continue murdering, would the subsequent possessions and the horrors have been avoided? But history doesn't allow for counterfactuals. What happened, happened. 5 children, at minimum, were murdered and had their spirits bound to animatronics. Charlotte Emily died in a rainy alley, while the machine meant to protect her shorted out in the water. Elizabeth Afton was killed by the very animatronic her father designed to murder other people's children. The Bite of 83 killed a young boy whose brother's prank went horrifically wrong. The Bite of 87 destroyed Jeremy Fitzgerald's frontal lobe. Multiple night guards were killed by possessed animatronics acting on confused, fragmented memories, and countless others suffered as Fazbear Entertainment's legacy of tragedy expanded through decades. The survivors carry burdens that most people couldn't imagine. Michael Afton, if he still exists in some form after the pizzeria simulator fire, is an undead corpse driven by guilt and determination, his existence an unending punishment for a childhood mistake that he's tried desperately to atone for through years of horror. Vanessa, freed from Glitchtrap's control, must process actions she performed while possessed by malevolent code, high crimes and preparations for crimes that used her body while her consciousness was suppressed. Gregory bears the weight of having potentially killed his friend Cassie, regardless of whether that choice was necessary to prevent the mimic's escape. And what of those who were never directly involved, but who encountered the haunted machines, who worked as night guards or maintenance technicians, who celebrated birthdays at locations where murders occurred, who played VR games infected with malicious code? The trauma radiated outward from Fazbear Entertainment's core tragedies, touching thousands of people in ways ranging from mild unease to life-destroying horror, creating a legacy of fear and sadness that the company's bright colors and cheerful music could never adequately disguise. Looking back across this entire history, from the Golden Bear and Rabbit in their small diner to the massive pizza Plex, standing as a monument to ambition and eventual ruin, patterns emerge. Technology, however advanced, cannot be trusted to regulate itself or to resist corruption by those who understand it. Children, the supposed beneficiaries of all this entertainment innovation, were consistently the primary victims, suggesting that the promise of family-friendly fun was always more marketing than reality. And evil, whether human, supernatural, or artificial, proved remarkably resilient, adapting to each attempt to destroy it, finding new vessels and new methods to continue inflicting harm. The future remains uncertain. The mimic is loose, carrying violence and deception in its learned behaviors. Glitchtrap's code might persist in archived files and forgotten servers. Fazbear Entertainment as a corporate entity continues in some form, suggesting that new attempts at resurrection are possible, if not probable. The very ground where multiple locations stood is saturated with tragedy and supernatural corruption, creating areas where possession and paranormal activity remain elevated long after the physical structures have been demolished. But for now, as you drift into sleep, let this chronicle serve as a complete account of what happened, how it happened, and why it matters. The story of Fazbear Entertainment is a cautionary tale about ambition without ethics, innovation without responsibility, and the terrible costs of one man's evil amplified through technology across generations. It's a ghost story where the ghosts are real, a horror story where the monsters were once children, and a tragedy where the victims outnumber the villains by orders of magnitude. Sleep now, knowing the full history. Dream of pizzerias if you must, but remember that behind the party hats and birthday cakes, behind the singing animatronics and the cheerful advertisements, there were always shadows. And in those shadows, tragedies unfolded that would echo through decades, changing lives, ending lives, creating ripples of horror that haven't finished spreading even now. Years after the original diner first opened its doors to families seeking nothing more than a pleasant evening of entertainment and a slice of pizza. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the complete history of Fazbear Entertainment, please consider liking and subscribing. And let me know in the comments what aspect of this story intrigues you most, which characters you'd like to hear more about, or which mysteries you think still need unraveling. Until next time, rest well in the knowledge that the animatronics, at least for tonight, are safely confined to the stories we tell in the dark.